From the ground, it looks like a trick of light at first. A shadow moving against the clouds, something heavy, something wrong. The tower operator raises his binoculars, and that is when his hands start shaking. Because what he is seeing through those lenses does not make sense. It cannot make sense. The bomber approaching the airfield has a wing that is no longer a wing. Not damaged, not dented, torn open, gutted. Like something reached inside the metal and pulled it apart from within. And it is still flying, still holding altitude, still coming home. He reaches for the radio, but his voice catches. Because he knows what he is about to report will sound insane. He knows that every mechanic, every engineer, every pilot on this base will tell him the same thing. That aircraft should not be airborne. The physics do not work. The math does not allow it. But it is there, in the sky, defying everything they know. And then someone next to him says the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Why is that plane still classified? The operator looks down at his desk. At the memo that came through 3 hours ago. The one with no signature? The one that says if a certain aircraft approaches the field, all personnel are to remain silent about what they see. No photographs. No detailed reports. No questions. Just landed. And now he understands something worse than the impossible flight he is watching. Someone knew this was going to happen. Someone expected this. Which means this is not an accident. This is a test. Or a retrieval. Or something they will never be allowed to talk about. On the runway, fire crews are already moving into position. Medics, ground teams. Everyone is running, but nobody is talking. Because the silence is not just protocol, it is fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize you are watching something that should not exist, and someone very powerful decided it needed to come home anyway. Inside that aircraft, there are 10 men who have been flying for hours with a wing that is barely a wing. 10 men who know that every second in the air is borrowed time. 10 men who were given an order that should never have been given. Do not bail out. Bring it back. No matter what. And now, as the bomber drops lower, the people on the ground can see more. They can see the torn metal flapping in the slipstream. They can see the way the aircraft is tilted, like it is trying to compensate for something that cannot be compensated for. They can see the way it is shaking. But what they cannot see, what they will never be allowed to see, is what is inside that plane. What cargo is so important that 10 lives are expendable? What payload is worth ordering men to fly a machine that should have torn itself apart an hour ago? The tower operator keys his radio one more time. Baker 1-7, you are cleared to land. God be with you. There is a pause. Static. Then a voice, calm and cold and tired. Tower, we are coming in. Tell my. And then nothing. Just the sound of engines. Just the sight of a dying aircraft limping toward a runway it might never reach. This is World War II uncovered. And this is the story of a landing that was classified for 74 years. Not because of how they survived, but because of what they were carrying, and why someone decided it was worth the risk. Before we go any further, I just want to say thank you for being here. This is the kind of story that does not make it into the documentaries. The kind that slips through the cracks of history because someone stamped it with a classification nobody thought to remove. If you are into mysteries that actually happened, stories that were buried for reasons we are still trying to understand, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that bell, because what we are about to uncover gets stranger the deeper we go. And trust me, we are going deep. Now, back to that photograph. The one that was finally declassified in 2019. The one that shows a B-17 heavy bomber sitting on a runway with 40% of its right wing missing. Not damaged, missing. Torn away in a pattern that does not match flak, does not match collision, does not match anything the engineers had seen before. And stamped across the top of that photo, in faded red ink, are 2 words that should not be there. Classification unknown. Not declassified. Not secret. Not top secret. Unknown. Means that somewhere in the chain of command, someone lost track of why this image was locked away. Or someone decided it was safer to bury it so deep that even the people guarding it forgot what they were guarding. But the photo survived. And now we have it. And now we can ask the questions that nobody was allowed to ask in 1944. Why was this plane ordered to land instead of letting the crew bail out? Why were 11 witnesses transferred out of the unit within 72 hours? And what the hell is Protocol Phantom? Let me show you what the damage actually looked like. Not from the official photo. That one is clean. staged, taken after the aircraft had already been secured and the site cleared. But there is another image. A contact print that sat in a shoebox in Ohio for 60 years until the grandson of a ground crew mechanic decided to scan it and post it online. And when aviation historians saw it, they went quiet. Because the metal was not just torn, it was peeled. Like someone had grabbed the wing skin from the inside and pulled it outward. The rivets were not sheared off, they were still in place. But the aluminum around them had deformed, stretched, warped in a way that did not match explosive force. Flak hits hard and fast. It punches holes. It leaves shrapnel embedded in the structure. It scorches the paint. This was none of that. This looked like the wing had been subjected to pressure from within. Like something inside the structure had expanded, or heated, or pushed against the framework until the metal gave way. And here is where it gets weird. In 1944, the United States Army Air Forces had very strict documentation protocols. Every combat mission got a report. Every landing incident got a file. Damage assessments, crew statements, maintenance logs, everything. This aircraft? Nothing. No mission report in the official archives. No incident file. No maintenance record of the wing being inspected or repaired. Just a notation in a unit logbook that says AB-17 returned to base with structural damage. No tail number, no crew names, no details. It is like someone went through the records and pulled out everything that mattered. But they missed something. In 2003, a researcher going through declassified radio transcripts found a fragment. A partial transmission from September 19, 1944. It is only 11 seconds long. The audio quality is terrible, but you can hear it. Command to Baker 17, negative on bailout. Repeat. Return aircraft intact. Cargo is Priority Alpha. Priority Alpha. That designation was reserved for one thing: materials or intelligence that could not fall into enemy hands under any circumstances. The kind of cargo that if it went down in occupied territory, someone was getting court-martialed, or worse. So what was on that plane? The official manifest says reconnaissance film canisters. Standard stuff. Every bomber flying intel runs carried them. But reconnaissance film does not get a Priority Alpha tag. It does not get a Do Not Bail Out order. And it definitely does not get a 74-year classification, unless it was not film. In 1944, the Allies were in the middle of a race to capture German scientists, German technology, German research before the Soviets got to it first. It would eventually become Operation Paperclip, but in the fall of '44, it was still informal, still improvised, still very, very secret. And one of the targets was aerodynamics research. The Germans were ahead, way ahead. They had swept wing designs, jet engine prototypes, wind tunnel data that would not be replicated in the United States for another decade, and the Allies knew it, which is why certain bombing runs into France and Germany were not really bombing runs at all. They were snatch and grab missions. Fly in, extract documents or hardware from captured facilities. Fly out, do not get shot down. And if you do get hit, do not let the cargo fall back into German hands, or Soviet hands, or anyone's hands except ours. This B-17 flew out of a base in southern England, but the flight path does not match any bombing mission logged that day. It shows the plane flying east into France, loitering over a region near Lyon for 40 minutes, then turning back. Lyon was liberated by Free French forces in early September of 1944, but the Germans had been there for years. And Lyon had something the Allies wanted: a Luftwaffe testing facility, not a major one. Not the kind that shows up in the history books, but a research outpost where the Germans had been experimenting with high-altitude pressurization, with asymmetric thrust management, with damage-tolerant wing structures, with exactly the kind of engineering that might explain how a plane with a shredded wing could stay airborne. So here is the theory, that B-17 was not damaged by the Germans. It was damaged by something it was carrying, something unstable, something experimental, something that the crew was ordered to bring home, no matter what. And when that thing failed, or activated, or whatever it did, it tore the wing apart from the inside. But the aircraft kept flying, which means either the crew was incredibly skilled, or the damage was not as catastrophic as it looked, or the plane had been modified in a way that allowed it to tolerate asymmetric failure. And somebody did not want anyone asking which one it was. The men who saw it happen did not stay quiet by choice. We know this because 3 of them tried to talk. Decades later, when they thought enough time had passed, when they assumed the classification had expired, when they believed no one was still watching, they were wrong. In 1992, a veteran named Robert Kern gave an interview to a local newspaper in Pennsylvania. He had been a ground crew chief at the base where the landing happened. 82 years old, retired, living alone. He told the reporter about a September day in '44, when a bomber came in with damage he had never seen before or since. He described the wing, the way it looked like it had been attacked from the inside. He mentioned the cargo, metal boxes with German markings, welded shut, guarded the moment they were unloaded. The article ran on a Thursday. By Saturday, 2 men in suits showed up at his house. They did not identify themselves. They did not threaten him. They just reminded him that certain agreements he had signed in 1944 were still in effect. That national security was not bound by time. That some secrets stay secret. Robert Kern never gave another interview. He died in 1997. At his funeral, his daughter found something in his jacket pocket. A small metal pin. A wing with a crack running through it. No insignia, no unit marker. Just the wing. She posted a photo of it online in 2015, asking if anyone knew what it meant. Within 6 hours, the post was deleted. Not by her, by the platform, with a notice saying it violated community guidelines. No explanation of which guidelines. No appeal process. She tried posting it again on a different site. Same result. Someone was still watching. Now, here is where it gets even stranger. In 2008, a historian researching Operation Lusty, the Allied program to capture German aircraft technology, found a reference in a logistics document. It mentioned a shipment of materials from France to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. September 1944. The shipment was listed as technical documents. Origin, Lion Region. Transport, Air. Status, delivered. Wright-Patterson was not just any base. It was where the military sent things they did not know what to do with. Unusual materials, unidentified objects, experimental technology. Later, it would become the headquarters for Project Blue Book, the Air Force's investigation into unidentified flying objects. But in 1944, it was just the place where weird stuff went to disappear. The historian requested the file on that shipment. It came back redacted. Not partially, completely. Every page was black ink except for the date and the phrase "contents classified." In 2008, 64 years after the fact, which means that whatever was in those boxes, whatever that B-17 was carrying, it was still considered sensitive in the 21st century, still worth protecting, still worth keeping quiet. And that brings us to the crew. 10 men flew that mission. We have their names, we have their service records, but we do not have their statements. We do not have their debriefings. We do not have any record of what they said happened up there. What we do have is this. All 10 were transferred out of their unit within 96 hours of the landing. Not together, separately, to different bases, different theaters, different commands. It was not a normal rotation. It was a dispersal, a scattering. The kind of thing you do when you do not want people comparing notes. The pilot, a captain named William Decker, was sent to a training base in Texas. He never flew combat again. His record says the transfer was voluntary, that he requested stateside duty for personal reasons. But his letters home, preserved by his family and donated to a military archive in 2012, tell a different story. He wrote to his wife in October of '44. The letter is careful, vague, but there is a line that stands out. They asked me to do something I will never be able to explain, and now they have asked me to forget it. I am trying, but I see that wing every time I close my eyes. He died in 1983. His obituary mentioned his service, his decorations, his family, but it did not mention the landing, because as far as the official record was concerned, the landing never happened. Except it did, and the photo proves it, and the wing with the crack proves it, and the redacted file proves it, and the men in suits who visited an 82-year-old veteran in Pennsylvania prove it. So what were they hiding? Not the landing itself. Plenty of damaged bombers made it home. That was not unusual. Not the crew's skill. Heroic flying happened every day in World War II. That was not classified. What they were hiding was the why. Why that plane had to land. Why the cargo could not be lost. And why, 80 years later, someone is still making sure nobody talks about it. Here is what should have killed them. Not the torn wing, not the missing structure, not even the asymmetric lift that was trying to roll the aircraft into a dive every single second. What should have killed them was the turn. To understand why, you need to picture the approach. The bomber is coming in from the east. The runway runs north to south. That means the pilot has to line up. He has to bank the aircraft. And banking loads the wings. On a healthy plane, this is routine. The wings flex. The structure absorbs the stress. You turn, you level out, you land. But this wing was not healthy. 40% of the surface area was gone. The load-bearing spars were exposed. The skin that was left was fluttering in the airflow like fabric. And every degree of bank added force to a structure that was already at the edge of failure. Standard procedure said do not turn more than 15 degrees with major wing damage. Anything past that and you risk a catastrophic fold. The metal bends past its tolerance. The rivets shear. The wing snaps backward and takes the tail with it. And then you are not flying. You are falling. And at 400 feet above the ground, you do not have time to react. You just die. So the pilot had a choice. Make a wide, gentle turn that would take him miles out from the airfield, burning fuel and time and hope. Or try a tighter approach and risk the wing collapsing mid-turn. He chose neither. According to the tower logs, the pilot did not turn at all. He flew straight at the runway. Not lined up, not angled, just straight. And then, half a mile out, he did something that no training manual recommended and no instructor would have approved. He yawed the aircraft. Yaw is not a turn. A turn banks the wings and curves the flight path. Yaw keeps the wings level and swings the nose sideways using the rudder. It is inefficient. It is draggy. It bleeds speed. But it does not load the wings the way a bank does. So that is what he did. He kept the wings as flat as possible, and he used rudder pressure to point the nose at the runway. The plane flew crooked, crabbed, like it was skidding sideways through the air. And it worked. The wings stayed intact. The structure held. The aircraft lined up without rolling. And the people on the ground who saw it had no idea what they were watching, because it looked wrong. It looked like the pilot had lost control. Like the plane was drifting. But it was not drifting. It was being flown with a precision that bordered on obsession. Every input was measured. Every correction was minimal. The pilot was not fighting the aircraft. He was negotiating with it. And that negotiation saved their lives. But here is the part that should not have worked. Yawing an aircraft creates something called adverse yaw. When you push the rudder, the nose swings one direction, but the drag on the tail tries to swing it back. On a normal plane, you compensate with aileron. You use the wing controls to keep it stable. But this pilot could not do that, because using the ailerons meant moving the damaged wing's control surfaces, and moving those surfaces meant flexing the structure. And flexing the structure meant risking a tear that would propagate through what was left of the wing and rip it completely off. So he flew the approach with almost no aileron input. Just rudder, just throttle, just tiny, invisible adjustments that kept the plane pointing forward without asking the wing to do anything it could not handle. And somehow, it held together. But then, they hit the wind. Not a gust, not a crosswind, just the normal turbulence that sits at the edge of every runway. The kind of bump that every pilot feels on final approach and ignores because it is routine. Except this was not a routine landing. The turbulence hit the damaged wing and the whole aircraft lurched. Not a lot, maybe 10 feet, maybe less. But the people watching saw the wing flex. They saw it bend in a way wings are not supposed to bend. And they saw the pilot correct. Not with a hard pull, not with a jam of the throttle. Just a slight adjustment, a nudge. The kind of input you would use if you were trying not to wake someone sleeping in the next room. And the wing held. But now they had another problem. They were too low. The gentle yaw approach had bled off more speed than the pilot had anticipated. The plane was sinking faster than it should. The runway was coming up, but they were not going to make the threshold. They were going to hit short. On the grass? On the rough ground that would collapse the landing gear and send the plane tumbling and probably ignite the fuel tanks. And the pilot knew it. The tower knew it. The fire crews knew it. And there was nothing anyone could do except watch and hope that physics would bend just one more time. There is a moment in every emergency where the people involved stop thinking and start reacting. Not panic, not chaos. Just the shift from conscious decision-making to something deeper. Muscle memory, training, instinct. That moment happened at 200 feet. The co-pilot, whose name we only know from a partially redacted personnel file, saw the ground rising too fast. He reached for the throttles, not to push them, to pull them back, because everything in his training said that if you are coming in too low, you add power, you climb. You abort the landing and go around for another try. But his hand never touched the controls, because the pilot said one word. No. Not loud, not shouted, just firm, final. And the co-pilot understood. Adding power would increase airspeed. Increasing airspeed would increase lift, but it would also increase the aerodynamic load on the damaged wing. And that wing was already holding together by luck and prayer, and the fact that they had been flying it like a museum artifact for the last 40 minutes. More power meant more stress. More stress meant structural failure, and structural failure at 200 feet meant 10 men scattered across a field in pieces. So they did not add power. They kept the descent rate exactly where it was, steady, controlled, sinking toward a patch of ground that was not a runway and hoping that somehow the math would work out. And here is where the story gets strange in a different way. Because the plane did not hit short. It cleared the fence. It cleared the grass. The wheels touched down 3 feet past the threshold markers, right where a normal landing would have put them, and nobody knows why. The tower operator said later that it looked like the plane floated, like it hung in the air just long enough to make the runway. One witness, a mechanic who was standing near the threshold, said the same thing. He said the aircraft should have hit the ground 30 yards short, but it just kept gliding. Now, there are explanations for this. Ground effect is real. When an aircraft gets close to the runway, the air compressed between the wings and the ground creates a cushion. Reduces drag. It extends the glide. Pilots use it all the time for smooth landings. But ground effect does not work when half your wing is missing. It does not work when your lift distribution is asymmetric and unstable. It does not work when your aircraft is on the edge of stalling, and every aerodynamic principle says you should already be falling. Yet somehow, it worked. Or something else happened that nobody could explain and nobody wanted to investigate. The wheels hit, the tires screamed. The nose stayed up for a moment, then dropped. The tail wheel touched, and the bomber rolled. But it did not roll smoothly. The damaged wing was dragging. The aileron on that side was jammed in a neutral position because the control cables had been severed in whatever event tore the wing open. So the plane wanted to pull left, wanted to ground loop, wanted to spin off the runway and collapse. And the pilot had to stop it. Not with brakes. Not yet. The brakes would lock the wheels and turn the roll into a skid, and a skid would put lateral force on the landing gear that the damaged wing could not absorb. So he used differential throttle. He kept power on the left engines, reduced power on the right, used thrust to counteract the drag, and keep the plane tracking straight down the center line. And for 50 yards, it worked. The aircraft stayed on the runway. It stayed upright. It decelerated smoothly. And then, something gave. Not the wing, not the gear, the tire. The right main tire, stressed beyond its limits from the uneven weight distribution, blew. The aircraft lurched. The right wing dipped. The metal scraped the pavement. Sparks flew. And for a moment, everyone thought this was it. This was the collapse. This was the moment the wing folded and the plane cartwheeled and the fire crews earned their pay. But it did not fold. The pilot cut all power. He let the plane decelerate on its own. He did not touch the brakes, did not fight the drift. He just let momentum bleed off naturally, and the aircraft slowed and finally stopped, 400 yards down the runway, tilted to the right, the damaged wing hanging lower than it should, but intact, still whole, still upright, and for 5 seconds, nothing happened. No radio calls, no movement, no sound except the cooling engines ticking and the wind pulling at the torn metal. The tower operator would say later that those 5 seconds felt longer than the entire approach because everyone was waiting for the delayed failure, the crack that had been building during the landing and was about to finish the job. But it never came. Instead, the hatch opened, and one by one, the crew climbed out. Not running, not jumping, just stepping down onto the wing, carefully, like they were afraid any sudden movement would wake something that was better left asleep. And when the last man was clear, the fire crews moved in, not to fight a fire, to surround the plane, to block the sight lines, to make sure nobody got close enough to see what was inside. The maintenance log entry is 4 lines long. Aircraft B, 17G, tail number redacted, landed with structural damage, starboard wing. Crew evacuated safely. Aircraft towed to Hangar 7 for inspection. Status: restricted access. 4 lines. No description of the damage, no assessment of airworthiness. No explanation of how an aircraft with that level of destruction managed to fly at all. Just 4 lines. And then, nothing. Hangar 7 was at the far end of the base, away from the main flight line, away from the repair shops. It was where they put aircraft that were waiting for parts, or waiting for orders, or waiting to be scrapped. But this plane was not waiting. By the time the sun set that day, Hangar 7 had guards posted at every entrance. Not military police, not regular security. Men in uniforms with no unit patches, no name tags, no insignia except a single letter stenciled on their helmets. I. Intelligence. And intelligence does not guard broken airplanes. A sergeant named Thomas Novak was working the flight line that evening. His job was routine: check the tie-downs, make sure everything was secured for the night. He walked past Hangar 7 around 1900 hours. The doors were closed, the guards were outside, and he could hear something inside. Not voices, not footwork, machinery, cutting, grinding. High-pitched whine of metal being sectioned, and beneath that, something else. A low-frequency hum that he said made his teeth ache. He kept walking. He did not ask questions, because you do not ask questions when intelligence shows up, but he wrote about it later, in a letter to his brother, a letter that was donated to a historical society in 2006 after both men had died. They were taking that plane apart, he wrote, not repairing it, dismantling it, like they were looking for something, or hiding something. I do not know which, but they worked all night. I could hear it from the barracks. By morning, the plane was gone, not moved. Gone. The hangar was empty. The guards were gone. There was no indication that anything had been there at all, except for scorch marks on the concrete floor, dark streaks, the kind you get from acetylene torches when you are cutting through heavy metal in a hurry. And the crew? They were already gone too, transferred in the middle of the night. No goodbyes, no debriefing. Just orders and transport and dispersal to bases across 3 continents. But before they left, someone made them sign something. We know this because of a document that surfaced in 2017. A researcher, going through estate records, found a folder belonging to the pilot, William Decker. Inside was a carbon copy of a non-disclosure agreement, dated September 20th, 1944. The text is mostly standard. Acknowledgement of classified information. Agreement not to discuss mission details. Penalties for violation. But there is a clause at the bottom that is not standard. Signatory agrees that all events related to operation, and here the text is redacted, including, but not limited to, aircraft damage, cargo contents, and landing procedures, are classified indefinitely and may not be discussed, written about, or referenced in any form, including private correspondence and family communication, without prior written authorization from the Office of Strategic Services. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, which means this was not a military matter. This was intelligence. This was espionage. This was something that went beyond combat operations and into the world of secrets that do not have expiration dates. And that brings us to the cargo. We know it was unloaded. We know it was unloaded immediately, because there is a logistics requisition form, partially declassified in 2010, that shows a truck convoy departing the base at 0200 hours on September 20th. Destination: Wright-Patterson Army Airfield, Ohio. Wright-Patterson. Again. The requisition lists the cargo as technical materials, origin France, classification special handling. Special handling. That is the designation used for materials that require climate control, or shielding, or armed escort, or all 3. The convoy arrived at Wright-Patterson on September 23rd, and then the paper trail stops. There is no receiving document, no inventory list, no record of what happened to the materials after they reached the base. But there is something else. In 1953, 9 years later, Wright-Patterson published an internal technical report on advanced aerodynamic structures. It was a feasibility study on damage-tolerant wing designs, wings that could sustain significant structural loss and still maintain flight. The report referenced data from field observations conducted during wartime operations, but did not specify which operations or when they occurred. And buried in the appendix, there is a single diagram, a cross-section of a wing spar, showing stress distribution across a partially severed structure. And in the corner, in small print, a notation. Reference, Test Article Bravo 17, September 1944. Bravo 17. Baker 17. The same aircraft. Which means they did not just hide what happened. They studied it. They learned from it. And they used that knowledge to build something new. So here is the question nobody has answered. Was that damage an accident that they decided to exploit? Or was it a test that went wrong and had to be covered up? Because if it was a test, that means they knew the wing would fail. It means they put 10 men in an aircraft with an experimental structure and sent them into a situation where failure was not just possible, but expected. And then they made them bring it home, no matter what. Let me tell you about the reunion. 1979, 35 years after the landing, a hotel conference room in Cleveland, Ohio. The kind of gathering that happens every year at veteran reunions across the country. Old men swapping stories, comparing scars, remembering the ones who did not make it home. Except this reunion was different. There were only 8 men in the room. 2 had died, one from cancer in '56, another from a car accident in '62, but 8 was enough. 8 survivors of a flight that officially never happened, gathering to talk about something they had been ordered never to discuss. And they wore the pins. All of them. Small. Silver. A wing with a crack running through it. Pinned to their lapels like a secret handshake rendered in metal. One of their sons took a photograph. It ended up online decades later, and that is how we know what the pins looked like. But more importantly, that is how we know what the men looked like. They were not smiling. Most reunion photos from that era show laughter, relief, the joy of surviving long enough to get old together. But these men looked tired. Even 35 years later, they looked like they were carrying something heavy. The son who took the photo, a man named David Pritchard, wrote about the reunion in a blog post in 2014. He said his father, the navigator, barely spoke during the event. None of them did. They sat. They drank coffee. And after about an hour, one of them stood up and said they should probably go. That was it. No stories. No reminiscing. Just an hour of silence, and then a quiet dispersal. David asked his father about it on the drive home. Asked why they had bothered to meet if they were not going to talk. And his father said something that stuck with him. We did not meet to remember. We met to make sure we all still knew to stay quiet. Which implies something darker than nostalgia. It implies that even in 1979, 35 years after the war ended, they still believed someone was listening. Still believed that breaking the silence would have consequences. And maybe they were right. Because in 1987, something happened that should not have been possible. One of the crew members, the bombardier, gave an interview to a graduate student researching World War II aviation incidents. The interview was recorded, transcribed, filed with the university's oral history project. And in the interview, he talked about the landing, not in detail, not with specifics, but he mentioned the damage. He mentioned the order to bring the plane back. He mentioned the cargo. And he said something that nobody had said on the record before. They told us it was German research, technical documents. But documents do not make a wing tear from the inside out. The interview was filed in March of '87. By June, the bombardier was dead. Heart attack. At home. No suspicious circumstances. He was 71 years old. It happens. But here is the strange part. 2 weeks after his death, someone from the university called his widow, said they were updating the archive, asked if she wanted a copy of her husband's interview. She said yes. They told her they would send it. It never arrived. And when she called back, they told her there was no record of the interview, no tape, no transcript, no file. She insisted. She had the confirmation letter. She had the date. She had the name of the graduate student who conducted it. The university checked again. Nothing. The graduate student? Transferred to another school in '88. No contact information on file. The tape? Lost during a routine archive reorganization. The transcript? Never digitized. Presumed destroyed. And the widow stopped asking questions because by that point she understood what her husband had understood 35 years earlier in that hotel conference room in Cleveland. Some silences are enforced. Now you might be thinking this is conspiracy thinking. You might be thinking that lost archives and dead veterans and missing interviews are just the normal chaos of time and bureaucracy. And maybe you are right. Explain this. In 2019, when the National Archives declassified the photograph of the damaged B-17, they released it with a statement. The statement said the image had been reviewed and found to contain no information relevant to current national security concerns. Standard language. Routine. Except the image was stamped declassified in 2019, which means someone reviewed it in 2019, which means someone, 75 years after the landing, still considered it sensitive enough to require review. And when researchers requested additional materials related to the incident, the request was denied, not because the materials were still classified, but because, according to the response letter, no additional materials exist in relation to this incident. No mission report, no crew statements, no maintenance logs, no damage assessment, no cargo manifest, nothing, except a photograph that was hidden for 74 years, and a group of veterans who met once to remind each other to stay silent. So what was on that plane? What did they see? And why, 80 years later, is someone still making sure the answer stays buried? Because here is what we know for certain. 10 men flew a plane that should not have been able to fly. They landed it under orders that should never have been given. They were scattered, silenced, watched. And when one of them tried to talk, the record disappeared. That is not a cover-up of incompetence. That is a cover-up of something that still matters. So, what actually happened up there? Not the official version, not the classified version, the real version, the one that makes sense of the torn wing and the missing records and the 75 years of silence. I am going to give you a theory, not proof, not certainty, but a theory built on the fragments we have, the pieces that slip through the cracks, and I want you to decide if it holds together. Start with what we know. September 1944. The Allies are advancing, the Germans are retreating, and in that chaos, there is a window. A narrow window where facilities are abandoned but not yet secured, where documents are left behind, where technology sits unguarded for just long enough to be taken. The B-17 flies into France, lands at a captured airfield, picks up cargo, not film, not paperwork, something physical, something heavy, something that requires special handling and armed guards and metal boxes welded shut. Now add this. In 1943, the Germans were experimenting with something called Schräge Musik, upward-firing cannons mounted in night fighters. They were devastatingly effective against bombers because they attacked from below, where the bombers had no defensive guns. But the system had a problem. The recoil. Firing a cannon upward inside an aircraft creates stress on the frame. The Germans solved it with reinforced mounts and shock absorbers. But what if they were working on something else? What if they were testing a system that did not just absorb recoil, but redirected it? A system that used the energy of the blast to actually strengthen the structure instead of weakening it? It sounds insane. But the Germans were experimenting with a lot of insane things in 1944. Rocket planes, jet fighters, guided missiles. They were throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck because they were losing and they knew it. So imagine this. The B-17 picks up prototype hardware. Maybe a mounting system, maybe test data, maybe both. And somewhere over the channel something goes wrong. Maybe it is installed incorrectly. Maybe it activates accidentally. Maybe it does exactly what it was designed to do, but in an aircraft that was not built to handle it. And the wing tears. Not from flak, not from collision, from an internal pressure event, a release of energy that the structure was never meant to contain. But here is the key. The tear does not propagate. It does not spread. It reaches a certain point and stops, because the energy has dissipated. The system, whatever it was, has exhausted itself, and the crew realizes they are still flying. They radio back. They report the damage. And someone on the ground does the math and realizes what they have. Not just a damaged aircraft, but proof of concept. Evidence that the system works. Germans were onto something real, and that evidence cannot fall into Soviet hands. It cannot crash in France. It cannot be lost. So they give the order, bring it back. And the crew does. They fly a plane that should be falling. They land it using techniques that are not in any manual. They risk everything because they have been told that what they are carrying is worth more than their lives. And when they land, the plane is stripped. Not repaired. Stripped. The damaged section is removed. analyzed, studied. And the data goes to Wright-Patterson, where it sits in a vault until someone figures out how to use it. And 9 years later, a report comes out about damage-tolerant structures, about wings that can survive partial failure. And buried in that report is a reference to test article Bravo 17, which means they learned from it, which means the landing was not just a survival story. It was a data collection event. And the crew? They signed non-disclosure agreements. They were scattered. They were watched. Because what they had experienced was not just classified. It was foundational. It was the beginning of research that would eventually lead to modern composite structures and redundant load paths and all the technology that makes aircraft safer today. But it started with a torn wing and a crew that was told to bring it home no matter what. Now, I cannot prove any of this. The documents are gone. The witnesses are dead. The physical evidence was destroyed or hidden decades ago. But the pattern is there, and patterns do not lie. So here is my question for you. If this was just a normal combat incident, why the secrecy? Why the transfers? Why the missing records? Why the 80-year classification? And if it was something more, something experimental, something that changed the way we build aircraft, why not take credit for it? Why not celebrate the innovation? Unless the innovation came from the enemy. Unless admitting what they found means admitting how far behind the Allies were. Unless the whole story reveals something uncomfortable about the war that we have been told was good versus evil, us versus them, when the reality was more complicated. We took their scientists. We took their technology. We took their research. And we built the post-war world on a foundation that we would rather not examine too closely. That B-17 landing is not just a story about skill or bravery or survival. It is a story about what we are willing to do when the stakes are high enough, what we are willing to hide when the truth is inconvenient, and how long we are willing to keep a secret when that secret is the price of progress. If you have made it this far, thank you. Seriously, this is the kind of story that does not get told because it lives in the gaps, in the missing files and the redacted pages and the silences that last longer than lives. If you want more of this, if you want to keep digging into the things that slipped through history's cracks, go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment if you have theories of your own, because I am not the only one asking these questions. And the more of us who ask, the harder they are to ignore. Next time, we are looking at the Berlin landing, a B-17 that came down in Soviet-controlled Germany with all 10 crew members dead. No bullet holes, no structural damage, just 10 men dead in their seats. And radar data that was classified for 60 years because it showed something in the sky that should not have been there. Until then, keep asking questions. Because the answers are out there, they are just buried under 75 years of silence.